ready for a treasure hunt. Instead of digging for gold, though, we're uncovering the hidden histories buried within the words you use every day.
It's amazing what you find when you start digging into etymology.
Right.
It's like each word has this secret past, and once you know it, you can't unknow it.
It's true. Take the word beef, for example. You probably used it today without a second thought, but did you know it's actually French? No cows involved in the word's origin story.
And that's just one example of how English is this incredible blend of influences. It's not a pure language at all, more like a linguistic melting pot.
We actually have a few articles on the history of the English language lined up for today, and one even called it a mutt of a language, which I have to admit is a pretty accurate way to describe it.
It makes sense, though, when you think about it. Centuries of invasions, migrations, conquests, all these cultural exchanges, they all left their mark on the language.
So let's dive into those historical layers, shall we? And let's start with the basics. When we talk about the major influences on English, we have to start with the Celts, who were living in the British Isles long before those Anglo-Saxons showed up, bringing their Germanic language with them.
And the Anglo-Saxons really laid the foundation for English as we know it, especially when they arrived around the 5th century. But then a few centuries later, the Vikings made their grand entrance, bringing Old Norse into the mix.
You can almost picture it, right? These waves of different languages crashing onto the shores of English. And of course, we can't forget the impact of Latin, particularly with the Roman Empire's influence and later the Church. So you've got all these ingredients going into the melting pot.
And to illustrate how dramatically English has transformed over time,
Yeah.
consider this. Old English, spoken roughly between the 5th and 12th centuries, is completely unintelligible to modern English speakers. Take a phrase like wet. We gardena in Girigum. That's the opening line of the epic poem Beowulf. Good luck understanding that without a dictionary and a whole lot of patience.
Right. It's like a completely foreign language.
Exactly.
It really hits home how much English has evolved. But I think for many people, when they think of English's influences, they think of French, especially after the Norman Conquest in 1066.
And with good reason. The Norman Conquest was a seismic event in English history, and its impact on the language is undeniable.
So the Norman Conquest, huge moment in history. But what's really interesting is how this one event still echoes in the words we use every single day.
It's estimated that almost a third of English vocabulary can be traced back to French roots. That's a significant chink of the language, and it speaks volumes about the lasting legacy of the Norman Conquest.
30%. That's wild. What kind of words are we talking about specifically?
Let's start with something relatable. Food. Think about it. Beef, pork, poultry. Those words, all associated with what we eat, come from French. The Anglo-Saxons, on the other hand, they used cow, pig, and chicken.
So the Normans, being the conquerors, they got to use their fancy French terms for the food, while the everyday folks stuck with their Anglo-Saxon words. It's like you can see the power dynamics of the time reflected right there on the dinner plate.
Exactly. And this wasn't limited to just food. The Normans brought a whole new vocabulary for government and law with them. Words like parliament, justice, and court, all French in origin. These weren't just words. They represented a new system of governance imposed by the conquerors.
So through language, they were reshaping not just how people spoke, but how they lived and were governed. It makes you realize how powerful words can be. But it wasn't all about government and big abstract concepts, was it? French words snuck into our everyday vocabulary too, right?
Absolutely. Think about the words we use for common household objects. Shirt, dress, chair, table. These seemingly ordinary words all have their origins in French, a subtle reminder of the Norman influence woven into the fabric of our daily lives.
It's fascinating how these linguistic remnants of the past are still so present in our lives, even if we don't realize it. But, when you look at the bigger picture, English's borrowing habits extend far beyond just Europe.
That's right. And this really speaks to the remarkable adaptability and some might say audacity of English. It's like it has this incredible ability to absorb words from practically every corner of the globe.
It's like English has a passport full of stamps from all these different languages. So besides the usual suspects, Latin, French, and so on, what other languages have left their mark on English? I'm especially curious about the examples from the articles, like that kindergarten fact.
Well, for starters, let's talk about kindergarten. I mean, who doesn't have fond, or maybe not so fond, memories of kindergarten? But it's interesting to think that this very word we use for early childhood education came from German. It literally translates to children's garden, which suddenly makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
It paints such a vivid picture, right? A garden where kids can learn and grow. I love it. What else do we have? I'm ready for more word origin surprises.
Well, how about a word with a bit more intensity? Berserk. We use it to describe someone in a state of wild frenzy or chaos. And it turns out we have the Vikings to thank for this wonderfully evocative word. It comes from berserker, which in Old Norse referred to those fierce warriors who fought with a trance-like fury.
Okay, I'm starting to see a theme here. Food, education, extreme emotions. Are there any areas of life that haven't been touched by borrowed words? Oh, and we can't forget about that avocado toast everyone loves. Isn't there a story behind that word, too?
You're right, almost every aspect of our lives is reflected in these borrowed words. And you're spot on about avocado. That delicious fruit, now a staple in many breakfast meals, gets its name from the Nahuatl language spoken by the Aztecs. It originally referred to the avocado tree's fruit as aguacatl, which, interestingly enough, had another, let's say, more personal connotation.
Okay, that's a story for another time, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's incredible to think that even a word as common as avocado has this whole journey behind it, traveling across languages and cultures.
It truly highlights how language is constantly evolving, shaped by historical events, cultural exchanges, and even our changing culinary tastes.
Speaking of shaping language, it's not just about borrowing words wholesale, is it? The where do new words come from article pointed out that we're always finding new ways to create words, too.
It's true. English has these clever little tricks for taking existing words and molding them to new forms, like motel, for example. It's a blend, a perfect fusion of motor and hotel.
So efficient. And speaking of efficiency, we also just shorten words like with exam. No need to waste time saying examination when you can get straight to the point.
Precisely. Clipping, it's called. Gets the job done with minimal syllables. But perhaps my favorite method is back formation. It's almost like linguistic time travel.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. Enthus, am I right?
You got it. We use enthuse all the time. But here's the thing. It actually came after the noun enthusiasm. They essentially reverse engineered a verb from a noun, which I find utterly fascinating.
It's like the word's origin story is playing out in reverse. These examples make you want to grab a dictionary and start digging into the history of every word you come across. But where do you even begin?
Well, every word detective needs their trusty tools. And in the world of etymology, that tool is the Oxford English Dictionary, often referred to as the OED. It's the ultimate authority on the English language, tracing words back through centuries across different languages to their earliest recorded forms.
So the OED is like the Sherlock Holmes of dictionaries. What mysteries can it help us unravel?
Let's take the word coast, for example. We use it to talk about the land bordering the sea. But when we consult the OED, it takes us back to its Middle English ancestor cost, which in turn was borrowed from the Old French cost. And if we keep following the trail, we eventually arrive at the Latin word costa, meaning rib or side.
So from rib to seaside, that's quite a journey. Who knew a simple word like coast had such a rich history?
It's amazing, isn't it? And that's just one example. Let's try another word, one you might not use every day, but it's got a fascinating backstory. The word yoke. You know, that wooden frame used to harness oxen together for plowing.
Right, although I have to admit I've never actually used a yoke myself.
Understandable. But the word itself has been around for centuries. The OED traces it back to the Old English geok, then further back to the Proto-Germanic language, the ancestor of English, German, and other related languages. And get this, yoke even has relatives in other Indo-European languages, hinting at a shared linguistic heritage stretching back thousands of years.
Wow, talk about deep roots. It's like we've gone from a simple farm implement to uncovering connections that span millennia. It really makes you appreciate the hidden depths of language.
It's true. Each word has a story to tell, a history that connects us to the past in ways we might never have imagined.
Yeah, it really is amazing when you start thinking about it like that. It's like we're uncovering these hidden connections between words and cultures and time.
Exactly. And that's what makes etymology so fascinating. It's an invitation to never stop questioning, to always be curious about the words we use every day.
It's like every word has a story to tell.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe someday someone will be tracing the origins of a word we use today and uncover a piece of our history.
That is a really cool thought. So as we start to wrap up our deep dive here, what would you say is the main takeaway for our listeners? What's the one thing you hope they remember about where words come from?
That English is not this pure, unchanging entity that some might imagine. It's messy, it's dynamic, It's a tapestry woven from the threads of countless other languages. And understanding those origins, those connections, it gives you a deeper appreciation, not just for English, but for the rich tapestry of human history and culture that it reflects.
I love that. English as a tapestry. And when you look at each thread, each word, it's like this little time capsule just waiting to be opened.
It really is.
So where do you think the English language goes from here? I mean, we're always borrowing new words, we're inventing new words. What do you think the future holds for English?
It's impossible to say for sure.
Yeah.
But one thing's for certain. As long as humans are interacting, migrating, inventing, and expressing themselves, language will continue to evolve. New words will emerge, reflecting the changing world around us.
Maybe someday selfie will sound as ancient as Yoke does to us now.
Right.
But for now, we want to hear from you. If you stumble upon any surprising word origins, any linguistic gems that make you pause and think, wow, I never knew that, share them with us. Keep that curiosity alive. Keep exploring the hidden histories in the words you use every day. Until next time, happy word hunting.